how civilizations view the other. Let me start with the West. And by the West, I mean mainly Europe, and particularly Western Europe. We could start with the Greeks. The Greeks, as is well known, Greece developed in some city-states, Athens and Sparta and elsewhere, and they rapidly developed a very sophisticated civilization, philosophically, intellectually, linguistically, and this gave them a feeling of great superiority. So, to a considerable extent, the view of the other was of barbarians, of inferior peoples who didn't have the civilization of the Greeks. And so we start straight away with a binary view of the world, the civilized, the people living in these city-states, and the great mass of mankind outside who are at a lower level in various ways. That continues through into the next great phase, which is the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire again starts with a city which is synonymous with civilization, Civis, city, civilization, and Roman civilization in many ways very sophisticated, taking over quite a bit of the Greek legacy and adding to it a great practical bent in engineering and other things and in military power. And as Rome spreads and conquers Italy and then other parts of Europe, you have again a binary oppositional mentality. We are the civilized peoples, and the people on the edges who we may try and conquer or who may try and conquer us are the enemy, and they are inferior. They are barbarians again. They don't speak Latin. They don't have our sophisticated technologies and military structures. So it's a binary view in which we are preserving civilization against the onslaught of the barbarians. This binary view is then added to in a strong way around the time of the Roman Empire and a little later by the development of monotheistic religions. The first, the Jews, are much older, of course, and they're not a proselytizing religion. But with Christianity emerging and then adopted by the Roman Empire, the Roman Emperor, and a little later the Islamic civilizations emerging as powerful and conquering, you have a double binary theory. We are the people who not only carry civilization, but we carry the truth, the revelation of the deeper truth and meaning of life in our monotheistic belief in a single God who protects us, who favors us, and is not absent in the barbarians and now heathens who oppose us. That tendency is then exacerbated with the rise of two monotheisms, because now you have truth claimed by two powerful groups, the Christians and the Muslims, and for the next, from about the 7th, 8th century, for half a millennium or more, you have a strong battle between our version of the truth, the Christian version, and the others, the Muslims, the Islam, the infidels, and so on, who you have to send out crusades to try and defeat, or you are prepared to yourself to resist in your own countries. So throughout all that, it's us against them, white against black, the good against the potentially evil, and certainly the inferior. And that is the foundation for modern European thought and attitudes, and lies behind much of the thinking which was behind my education. I didn't realize it at the time because it was never explained to me, but this is the way in which I was taught to think, in this binary way. That tradition was then reinforced and taken one step further with the founding of another part of the Western psychology and philosophy. That is the founding of the New World. In the south, the European powers, Spain, Portugal, went and destroyed and seized the land of the native inhabitants as inferior and godless, and spread their mission of Christianity and predation and capitalism. And in the north, the first settlers from England and elsewhere encountered two new forms of otherness which were absent on the mainland of Europe. The first were the tribal ethnic groups of North America, the Indians, the original inhabitants, who, after helping to a certain extent the settlers, became their enemies. And so you had a 200 or 300 year war of extermination to a large extent, whereby the growingly powerful eastern settlements and provinces of North America moved westwards, killing and seizing the land of all those who stood in their way, who were considered to be savages. They were backwards in every way, and inferior and infidels. So you had no compunction in eliminating them if they put up any resistance. That was added to by a second feature which was absent certainly in England and most of Western Europe, which was from the later 17th century, the importation of black slaves from Africa. And these were taken to the West Indies and to the southern part of the United States. And again, you could regard them, if you were a white settler in the Americas, as not merely the other, but basically inferior. So inferior indeed that they could be treated as animals. They were almost animals. They didn't have any of our qualities of religion or civilization, and so they were slaves. And slavery continued, as we know, for several centuries, and only very recently has the black people of the Americas been given more or less equal rights. So you had a very binary view stemming from the Greeks, exacerbated in what became later the most powerful nation on earth. So this attitude that the other is not only worse, a threat, but also inferior, is deeply rooted, I realize, in myself and in all that I learnt and was taught and experienced through much of my life. And we're not aware of it, and it's not an individual fault. It is the result of a long history, as I've tried to very, very briefly and perhaps oversimply explained. So that's one view from the West, and of course it then colours everything else. It coloured the encounters of the Western empires with the rest of the world. At first, the British Empire, for example, the British encountered very sophisticated people in India and Asia, and for a while treated them more or less as civilized people, but gradually, as Western dominance militarily and technically and in other ways grew, they were increasingly treated as inferior human beings to be used by the West. And that tendency then was exacerbated with the growing power of the West industrially through the 19th century, and this attitude of arrogant superiority and opposition to the other moved across Eastern Asia and through Africa, South America, and elsewhere, and continued right up and continues right up to the present. The attitude towards the yellow people of the East is not merely one of competition, opposition, fighting with them, but a generalized view that they are somehow less civilized than us. They are expendable, perhaps. They are very different and somewhat incomprehensible, but at a lower stage of civilization than us. That's how I think I was brought up, and it's a difficult view to escape from, but one we have obviously got to readjust to. That's a simple view of one side. The other side is the East, and particularly China. China, if you go back to a simple point of origin, I often take the unification of China for the first time under the first Qin emperor in 221 BC. And here you had, after long periods of war and confrontation between 4 or 5 very powerful kingdoms in China, lasting back hundreds of years, one of them, the Qin, became dominant and conquered and incorporated the rest. They were all ethnically more or less similar Han people, and they regarded the other kingdoms as politically weaker or their vassals, but not different people and not inferior. So China, the Han China, was unified as a set of provinces or kingdoms that were united, though falling apart occasionally later. And round that kingdom there were other states and peoples. Some of them were living in quite sophisticated political and other organizations in Korea, later in Japan, in Tibet, in Burma, with old traditions of civilization. And they were regarded as weaker, obviously, with the vast power of China. They might have less wisdom, but they were basically like us. They were civilized Mongolian peoples. The relationship was really one of paternalism, of an older brother or a younger brother. And another way of thinking of the relationship is in the famous phrase of the Middle Kingdom. China was in the middle. It was like the sun in the galaxy. It was the Middle Kingdom, the sun, which was circled by the planets of these other peoples, not only the states and kingdoms, but also powerful nomadic peoples, the Manchus, Mongolians, and others, and also relatively powerful ethnic minorities, some of them very large, like the Dai or Thai or the Miao, with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people. So The Chinese view was that you should live, if possible, in harmony with your neighbours, because otherwise you have endless border wars, and you should deal with that by treating them as younger brothers who had your protection and in return showed respect and maybe some symbolic tributes or acknowledgement of your central place. There was no idea that out there were savages who should be compelled to accept your views. There was no monotheistic religion which meant that you had the final grasp of truth and that it was your duty to go out and spread that elsewhere. So there was no evangelical mission, and there wasn't even a mission to conquer landed territories. Gradually the hand spread, but that was just a gradual movement, westwards, northwards, southwards. There was no particular aim of the government to go and conquer. Very few, given their size and the length of time, very few wars against the neighbours. So there's two different models, and they now coexist in the world. The Western view, which is still largely one of limited good, of zero-sum games. If they gain, we lose. It's our duty to defeat them in some way and to make them more like us, because we have the revealed truth of our belief systems and our superior civilization. That's one worldview which has lasted until pretty recently. It's changing fast, I think, but it was a strongly underpinning view of the world. And another in the East, which is that we should aim at harmony, working together, win-win, and trying to face up to the huge challenges of difficult climates, often overpopulation, disease, and so on, together, rather than expending our efforts in trying to conquer and take other people's territories. Now, some may say that in my reaction against my own upbringing and what I was taught, I've swung a long way to the other extreme, and I may have made it a little oversimple and black and white. But I think that unless we understand the long trajectory of a different path of historical development in these two ends of Eurasia, we won't be able to live together, because we will assume that the others think as we do. But this survey, I think, shows that the views are still quite a long way apart. And my hope is that some blend of the best of both of them can save this world from the ecological, military, and disease or other destruction which seems so close to us now.